to find out how to use my superpowers for good.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So let me get all set up here. So I have to rub my eyes a little bit. So believe it or not, we're still working on my contacts, but I think we almost have it. I mean, we're just this close. It's yay. It's been a journey. I have a wonderful eye doctor, so and patient, very patient. So last time I talked about how we can use our power of zeal in more than one way. And that just like every other spiritual law, it works no matter what. So that if you are focusing and being zealous in your negativity, you will create more negativity, right? And I encourage you to use your superpower of zeal for good, by always focusing on the positive things that you really want in your life. So most of you probably wouldn't even think about this or be aware of it, but a couple of weeks before the end of the month, I give my talk titles to Lynn and Cindy for the next month's newsletter. And sometimes by the time I get here, my talk has morphed just a little bit. I try to stick to the title, but my friend Richard Rogers frequently says, never let a good title get in the way of a good talk. So, but what I realized was, it just occurred to me, though I intended to talk exclusively about zeal today, it occurred to me that it might be good to look at this topic from the perspective of all of the powers that we have been talking about. So I will get back to zeal, I promise, but I really would like to look at the 8 that went before, and it's not going to be long. I just want to briefly summarize that what we see of these powers in the absolute realm may not always be how we use them for ourselves. And so, because when we realize that these powers, we have them innately, we might be tempted to use them from the human senses or physical perspective, rather than from spiritual awareness or higher consciousness. So let's just briefly summarize where we've been so far and create a little bit of awareness of how sometimes we might use these powers in ways that are not so good for us. So, okay, come on. Okay, now this isn't even lighting up. Okay. Oh, you did that? So the first one was love. And I'll just point at Jean. How about I just point at you when I want you to click? Will that work?
That's fine.
Okay. The old-fashioned way, right? That's what we used to do.
It's called using your superpowers.
It is. Okay, so, well, before I talk specifically about those powers, in a book called Your Forces, I ran across this when I was researching a little more about. I like to get some more feedback on the powers because we always look at Charles Fillmore's The 10 Powers of Man, and there are a couple other books that we in our LUT training have, but I went looking for something else, and I found Your Forces and How to Use Them, which, interestingly, and I bet if I asked my friend Jimmy Scott if he'd heard of this person, he would say, absolutely, I've read all of his books. But is it working now?
I think so.
Thank you. So, but I had never heard of him. So this man, this book called Your Forces and How to Use Them preceded Charles Fillmore's 12 Powers of Man by about 20 years. So over 100 years ago, Christian D. Larson said, in the average person, love is directed almost exclusively upon the personal side of life. The love nature becomes so personal, so limited, and so superficial that materialism follows. In many minds, it is mere appearances that attract the power of admiration, and the finer things in the mind, soul, and character are wholly ignored. But the power of love must direct the greater part of its attention upon that which is rich and beautiful in mind and soul, because man is as he thinks, and he thinks the most of what he loves the best. That was from Christian D. Larson in 1912. Amazing, isn't it? Nothing new under the sun. So love is a pivotal power. It has the ability to harmonize and unify everything and all the other powers. From the time most of us were children, we were taught, if we attended church then, we were taught God is love. And in unity, we believe according to our first unity principle, that God is good and everywhere present. So that means that love is everywhere and totally accessible to us all the time. So, from a higher consciousness, love is the ability to attract ourselves to divine ideas, truths, principles, and laws. The ability to match everything to divine idea. And these are some ways to use our power of love for good. Practice gratitude. Embrace forgiveness. Focus on doing things that make you feel good. Spend time with people. Come on, spend time with people who inspire you. Commit to positive change and help others. The next power we talked about was imagination. How do we misuse imagination? We're very good at this one. We're experts at making up stories. Whenever we don't have the facts, it's human nature to just make it up. And we are so good at this. This innate gift, unfortunately, is often used to envision all kinds of terrible things, like waking nightmares, even delusions and paranoia, or just wrong ideas that we've thought up and go with them. But used from a higher consciousness, it helps us to make divine ideas real to us. Imagination from this spiritual awareness perspective can actually be more important than reality because it helps us to create. And here's how you use this superpower for good. Imagination ignites passion. It creates your future. And it stimulates innovation. The next power was life. This is a very fluid, adaptable power. So when it's guided by love and wisdom, it has the ability to energize and motivate us. But what happens when it isn't used with these positive factors directing it? It can be frenetic or chaotic, based upon external influences, and living according to what others want you to be makes life not as good as it could be. So how is life best lived and used for good? With a sense of connection or oneness, contributing to the world in giving meaningful service, and embracing possibility over uncertainty, in other words, faith. The next power we talked about was understanding. The spiritual power of understanding lets us have direct perceptions of truth from the divine. But how do we use this in a way that might not be so good for us? I'm really good at this one. Sometimes we live in our heads and fail to access our spiritual self at all. We can become overly analytical and get stuck in a sort of an academic loop about our thoughts and beliefs. And our thoughts and beliefs may be perfectly positive, but if we're just swirling around in them, we're not connecting, and it keeps us from living a fulfilling life. When we seek spiritual understanding, which pretty much demands some time alone in silence with Spirit, there is a clear connection to God and the divine that resonates with the core of our very being and connects us to every other person or thing in the universe. Next, we talked about the power of strength. And how do we possibly misuse the power of strength? Sometimes we fall into stubbornness, forcefulness, pushing things to happen, or we're just obsessive compulsive. I have some of that. Probably you do too. There's a whole spectrum of obsessive compulsiveness. But if we're using our strength for good, some of the things most people see in us are these: tenacity and confidence, optimism and self-awareness, adaptability and flexibility, reliability and fairness, and consistency. Next, we talked about will. And this is the will that moves all other powers forward. It's about willingness and choosing our life based upon divine ideas. The ways we misuse this are by being willful rather than willing, by being obstinate and getting stuck. The ways that we use our power of will for good are these: accepting the responsibility of co-creating your own life, living your own authentic life based upon what you want and believe and not what others want for you, and embracing change and just going for it. The next power we talked about was judgment. We noted that judgment ranges all the way from being judgmental to discernment with understanding. When we judge by worldly standards, we can definitely be judgmental, which leads to discrimination, prejudice, and bigotry. But when we couple this judgment with understanding, it becomes spiritual discernment, which involves these things: integrity in our relationships, having real conversations with people, and checking in with your source for divine guidance. So that wasn't too bad, right? It's a lot. It's a lot to think about when you're using your powers, whether to use them for like just the normal human side, which we see and do a lot of every day, or really digging in and using your superpowers for good. So now we come to zeal. Zeal is the power that motivates us to grow and be successful. It is all about enthusiasm. In its less positive forms, it may show up as impulsiveness, compulsiveness, or being overly ambitious. So though zeal is such an exciting, wonderful power, it may be the most dangerous of all, with impulsiveness, compulsiveness, and extreme ambition being the downside. But from the highest spiritual perspective, at the absolute level, zeal is the ability to be passionate and enthusiastic about divine ideas and principles. Why is it so important? Because it draws other people in. Without enthusiasm, absolutely nothing great happens. As children, we're naturally enthusiastic. That desire to run and greet every new day with hope. That desire and that kind of enthusiasm is what keeps us alive and energized. It's the foundation of happiness, and something we should take care not to lose as we get older. How do you maintain enthusiasm when the world seems to be so messed up? This is a good question, bearing in mind the tragic events surrounding us in the past couple of weeks. The world has been in pain. Floods, hurricanes, wildfires, terrorist attacks. And then at home, we have people we love who are not well. We've lost a few. We have a lot to deal with in our world. There are a lot of challenges. Actually, it is probably easier sometimes to lose hope than to keep enthusiasm, unless you remember where it comes from. The root of the word enthusiastic is Greek. It comes from two words. The first is theos, meaning God, and the second is ente, or within. So the early use of this word by the Greeks really meant literally God within you. Enthusiasm means God within you. I love that. It makes me enthusiastic. It makes me have such a love for the word, which is very helpful. Enthusiasm means the divine being, who is the creator of love, truth, beauty, and goodness, is at the heart of the individual who mirrors these qualities. It is God in us that kindles the enthusiasm for real life and real love. Enthusiasm isn't naive or childish, but rather mirrors and expresses the innocence of God's pure love for all that is good. Being enthusiastic is something to cultivate. In his essay entitled Celebrate Yourself, Eric Butterworth says, that it is a curious thing to be alive. So curious, in fact, that it is madness not to sacrifice everything to get the full taste of being alive. He says that we need to be full participants in our life, and that requires zeal and enthusiasm. Not, as Brother Worth said, looking forward to things, but looking forward from an inward flame of life. Unfortunately, we are too often like the Israelites of the Bible, wandering in our own wilderness from job to job, relationship to relationship, place to place, looking for the promised land, the perfect life. But the interested and interesting person is the one who leads the exciting life by coloring everything in it with their own enthusiasm. Butterworth suggests that we make the journey from static to dynamic living, no matter where we are or what our age is. It's a journey of self-discovery. He says that within us, there are uncharted oceans and rich continents to be developed. Each of us is part of a whole, part of one another, and endowed with a wholeness that transcends the part. In the quest for self-knowledge, he says, we find freedom from boredom, tedium, and static living. We come to experience life that is dynamic and full and free. This is a life full of zeal and enthusiasm that Butterworth is describing. And Napoleon Hill, you know who he was, he wrote Think and Grow Rich, said this: enthusiasm is a state of mind that inspires and arouses one to put action into the task at hand. Enthusiasm bears the same relationship to a human being that steam does to the locomotive. It is the vital moving force that impels action. So that's the sizzle Charles Fillmore was talking about, the steam Napoleon Hill was talking about is zeal and enthusiasm. Here are some ways to harness the power of zeal. If you apply even some of these strategies, you'll find your energy increasing and your dreams and goals manifesting. First, Joseph Campbell, follow your bliss. There's no better way to generate enthusiasm than to be engaged in an activity that you enjoy. It could be anything. And to do work that you're passionate about. Second, have a plan. Creating a plan itself will get the enthusiasm going, and it'll get you ready and up each day to follow through on that plan. Get out of the victim mode. Nothing zaps enthusiasm faster than seeing yourself as a victim. See yourself instead as a creator, and continually take the steps that you need to take in order to get what you really want. Next, surround yourself with enthusiastic and optimistic people. People who will encourage you and challenge you to achieve your goals. Richard Rogers does a talk on letting go of unhealthy connections. And he says in it that sometimes, even though we have a soul connection to somebody, it isn't always a good connection. Sometimes we outgrow connections and we need to really let them go. So if you have to let them go in order to surround yourself with positive people, you need to consider that. Next, give all your attention to what you're doing. It's very difficult to generate enthusiasm when part of your brain's over here thinking about something and you're trying to do something here. Keep up your energy level. It's hard to generate enthusiasm when you feel tired. Make sure that you're getting enough sleep, eating healthy food, and taking breaks, people. I'm talking to me. I had a little email with Lynn last night, and the last thing I said was, I'm taking a break. And I had just finished looking over my dog, and I thought, I need to take a break. You just need a break sometimes, so take it. Lower your levels of stress. Set deadlines that you can keep. Don't push yourself to exhaustion or burnout. And take frequent breaks. There's the breaks again. And finally, just begin. Whatever you want to do, beginning it just makes you more enthusiastic. So I hope as we continue to look at the 12 powers, with which we are so graciously blessed, that we remember we hold the keys to how they're used. We can use them in ways that blend in with our culture and its collective consciousness, or we can always aim for the highest and best possible outcomes by expressing them in the divine spirit for which they were intended. We can always, always use our superpowers for good. Thank you. So let's take all of this that we've just been thinking about and all of this internal reflection that we've been doing into our meditation. We're so blessed. We are beloved children of God. We have all these blessings and powers from the day we're born. And it's our job to learn how to use them in the very best, most fulfilling, most joyous way that we can. It's our job to create our own lives and to be who we're meant to be. And so we open our hearts now to learn, to know, what is that thing? What are those things that I am here to do? What is the happiest I can be? What is the best way and the quickest way and the easiest way for me to get there? I'm ready to do that. I'm open to all my gifts, and I fully accept them. So we want to remember this not only here today, but as we leave here and go out into our lives, that we use our powers the way we choose to use them. And we can always use them from a higher consciousness. And so we are happy and joyful and enthusiastic about the wonderful life we can create for ourselves. And we're ready to do that, starting now. And we are grateful. And so it is. Amen. So now it's time for our